The Cuban Revolution was a transformative event that unfolded over the course of the 1950s, ultimately toppling a dictatorship and installing a new regime that would redefine Cuba's social, political, and economic structures while also altering the balance of power in the Cold War. The seeds of revolution were planted in a deeply unequal Cuban society where wealth and land were concentrated in the hands of a few, and where the government, led by Fulgencio Batista, had become increasingly corrupt, oppressive, and dependent on foreign, especially American, interests. Batista, who had previously served as Cuba's elected president, returned to power in a 1952 military coup, suspending democratic processes and ruling as a dictator with the backing of the Cuban military and police. His regime enriched itself and favored foreign investors, particularly in the sugar and tourism sectors, while much of the Cuban population, especially in rural areas, lived in poverty and lacked access to education and healthcare. Amidst this discontent, Fidel Castro, a young lawyer with nationalist and anti-imperialist ideals, emerged as a revolutionary leader. In July 1953, he and a small group of followers launched an armed assault on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba, hoping to inspire a mass uprising. The attack failed, many were killed, and Castro was captured and sentenced to prison. During his trial, he delivered his famous speech, "History will absolve me," which laid out his political vision for Cuba. After serving less than 2 years, he was released in a political amnesty and went into exile in Mexico, where he met the Argentine Marxist revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara. Together with his brother Raúl Castro and other exiles, Fidel organized the 26th of July movement, named after the failed Moncada assault. In December 1956, the revolutionaries returned to Cuba aboard the yacht Granma. Their landing was chaotic and met with heavy fire from Batista's forces. Most of the group was killed or captured, but a small handful, including the Castro brothers and Guevara, escaped into the Sierra Maestra mountains. From there, they began a prolonged guerrilla campaign. Over the next 2 years, they built popular support among the peasantry, implemented social reforms in the areas they controlled, and coordinated sabotage operations in the cities. Their cause gained traction as stories of Batista's brutality, including torture, censorship, and mass executions, alienated even the middle and upper classes. The movement skillfully used radio broadcasts and interviews with international journalists to shape its image and generate sympathy abroad. By late 1958, the tide had turned. Batista's military was demoralized and riddled with corruption and desertions, while the rebels expanded their territory. Che Guevara led a decisive campaign in central Cuba, capturing the key city of Santa Clara after a series of skirmishes. Realizing his position was untenable, Batista fled the country on January 1, 1959, taking with him millions of dollars. A week later, Fidel Castro and his army marched into Havana to the cheers of massive crowds, marking the revolution's official triumph. In power, Castro quickly moved to restructure Cuban society. Large estates and foreign-owned businesses were nationalized without compensation, schools were reformed and expanded, a nationwide literacy campaign was launched, and healthcare became universally accessible. While these reforms gained him popularity among many Cubans and international supporters, they also provoked hostility from the United States. Relations with Washington deteriorated rapidly, leading to economic sanctions and CIA-backed attempts to overthrow the new regime, culminating in the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961. In response, Castro publicly declared the socialist nature of the revolution and drew closer to the Soviet Union, establishing a communist government that aligned with the Eastern Bloc. Tensions between Cuba and the U.S. reached their peak during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, when Soviet nuclear missiles were discovered on the island, leading to a tense standoff that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. After a negotiated settlement, the missiles were removed, but the U.S. embargo remained in place for decades, and Cuba became a symbol of resistance for leftist movements worldwide. Internally, the Cuban government curtailed political freedoms, suppressed dissent, and established a one-party state under the Communist Party. Thousands of political opponents were imprisoned or fled into exile, particularly to the United States. The legacy of the Cuban Revolution is complex. On one hand, it brought substantial improvements in education, health, and land distribution, and challenged the domination of foreign capital. On the other, it replaced a dictatorship with an authoritarian regime that has been criticized for stifling civil liberties and mismanaging the economy. Nevertheless, the revolution remains one of the most iconic and influential uprisings of the 20th century, symbolizing both the possibilities and perils of radical political change.